The fluorescent lights in the cramped law office buzzed with an irritating persistence that matched the anxiety churning in Elena Vasquez's stomach. She sat in a worn leather chair that had seen better decades, her hands folded tightly in her lap as she stared at the stack of intimidating legal documents spread across the scratched wooden desk. The musty smell of old books and stale coffee permeated the air, a stark contrast to the pristine corporate environments she had grown accustomed to during her marriage. Where are you watching this story unfold from today? I'm curious to know what part of the world you're tuning in from, because power dynamics like these play out everywhere, and location often shapes how we view justice. Elena's lawyer, a soft-spoken man named David Restrepo, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses nervously as he reviewed the latest correspondence from her ex-husband's legal team. His modest office, squeezed between a dry cleaner and a bail bondsman, felt worlds away from the marble lobbies and mahogany conference rooms where her soon-to-be former husband conducted his business empire. Just 18 months ago, Elena had discovered the truth about her marriage to tech mogul Harrison Blackthorne. For 8 years, she had believed she was married to a brilliant entrepreneur who had built his cryptocurrency exchange platform from nothing. She had supported him through late nights, celebrated his successes, and never questioned the financial details of their increasingly lavish lifestyle. The sprawling mansion in the hills, the fleet of luxury cars, the private jet trips to international conferences. The truth had come crashing down during what should have been a routine review of their tax documents. Elena had always handled their personal finances, a task Harrison had gladly delegated while he focused on building his empire. But that cold February morning, while organizing receipts for their accountant, she had stumbled across a series of bank transfers that didn't match any legitimate business expenses she could identify. $23 million. Gone. Transferred to offshore accounts in jurisdictions she couldn't even pronounce. When she had confronted Harrison that evening, his reaction had been swift and brutal. No denial, no explanation, just cold calculation as he informed her that their marriage was over, that she would receive nothing in the divorce, and that if she breathed a word of what she had discovered to anyone, he would destroy her life completely. The embezzlement had been masterful in its complexity. Harrison had systematically siphoned money from investor accounts. Using his platform's reputation and her unwitting signature on documents she had trusted him to handle properly. She had been the perfect unknowing accomplice, signing papers during romantic dinners, approving transfers while distracted by conversations about their future together. Now, 6 months after that devastating revelation, Elena found herself facing the full force of Harrison's legal arsenal. David cleared his throat uncomfortably as he gestured toward the latest filing from opposing counsel. Harrison has retained Blackwood, Sterling, and Associates, David explained, his voice barely concealing his intimidation. They're bringing 10 attorneys to tomorrow's mediation hearing. 10. I've never seen anything like it for a simple divorce proceeding. Elena studied the letterhead of the correspondence before her. The law firm's name was embossed in gold, their office address placing them in the most expensive district of the financial center. She recognized several of the attorney names from business magazines, legal journals, and society pages. These weren't just lawyers. They were legal celebrities, the kind of high-powered advocates who typically defended Fortune 500 companies and international conglomerates. Marcus Blackwood himself was leading the team. The man whose name graced the firm's masthead had a reputation for obliterating opponents in corporate litigation. His track record included successfully defending pharmaceutical companies against class action suits, helping tech giants navigate antitrust investigations, and making criminal charges disappear for executives who could afford his services. Elena took careful notes as David explained the implications of facing such overwhelming legal force. Her handwriting remained steady despite the magnitude of what they were discussing. She asked specific questions about discovery procedures, evidence admissibility rules, and the technical requirements for financial documentation in divorce proceedings. David seemed surprised by the sophistication of her questions, but attributed it to her business background. After all, she had worked in various administrative roles throughout their marriage, even if Harrison had consistently downplayed her contributions as basic clerical work. The strategy Harrison's team was employing became clear as David outlined their demands. They weren't simply seeking to deny Elena any marital assets. They were actively pursuing alimony payments from her to Harrison, claiming that his business had suffered devastating losses due to her emotional instability during their separation. The psychological evaluation they were demanding would paint her as an unfit partner whose erratic behavior had damaged his earning capacity. Furthermore, they were asserting that Elena's discovery of financial irregularities had been an invasion of Harrison's privacy that violated confidentiality agreements she had supposedly signed. The penalty clauses in those agreements, if enforced, would leave her financially destroyed even beyond the divorce proceedings. Elena absorbed each detail methodically, occasionally interrupting David's explanations to clarify technical points about asset valuation, forensic accounting procedures, and the timeline requirements for filing counterclaims. Her questions demonstrated an understanding of legal principles that went deeper than casual curiosity, though she framed them as concerns of an anxious spouse trying to understand her situation. As the afternoon wore on, David's confidence seemed to diminish with each revelation about Harrison's legal strategy. The man had clearly expected a standard divorce proceeding, not a systematic campaign designed to financially and personally destroy his client. He suggested repeatedly that Elena should consider accepting a settlement offer, any settlement offer, rather than face the full force of Harrison's legal machine in open court. Elena listened patiently to each suggestion, then quietly requested copies of all relevant legal statutes governing divorce proceedings in their jurisdiction. She wanted to review the rules governing evidence presentation, witness testimony, and the standards for financial disclosure that both parties would be required to meet. When David expressed confusion about her need for such detailed legal research, Elena explained that she wanted to understand every aspect of what they would be facing. Her thoroughness impressed him, though he warned that legal knowledge gained from online research was no substitute for professional experience in the courtroom. As their meeting concluded, Elena made one final request that surprised David considerably. She asked for a 48-hour continuance of the mediation hearing, claiming she needed additional time to prepare emotionally for the overwhelming legal assault they were about to face. David agreed to file the request, though he warned that Harrison's team would likely object strenuously to any delay. They would portray it as yet another example of Elena's attempts to obstruct the proceedings, further evidence of the emotional instability they were already planning to highlight. Elena gathered her copies of the legal documents, organizing them with the same meticulous care she had always applied to their household finances. Her movements were precise and purposeful, betraying none of the helplessness that Harrison's team was expecting to exploit. Walking out into the late afternoon sunlight, Elena felt the weight of what lay ahead. Tomorrow's hearing would determine not just the future of her financial security, but whether justice could prevail against unlimited resources and ruthless legal tactics. Harrison had spent months preparing for this confrontation, assembling his team of legal mercenaries and crafting a strategy designed to leave her powerless and penniless. But Elena had been preparing too, in ways that neither Harrison nor his expensive attorneys could possibly imagine. The 48-hour delay she had requested wasn't about emotional preparation. It was about scheduling. There were phone calls to make, arrangements to finalize, and one particular conflict to resolve that would change everything about tomorrow's proceedings. As Elena drove home through the city streets, passing the gleaming towers where Harrison's empire continued to thrive, she allowed herself a small smile. Her ex-husband had always underestimated her intelligence, dismissing her capabilities and treating her contributions as insignificant. That condescension had been his greatest weakness throughout their marriage. Tomorrow, it would become his downfall. The conference room at Blackwood, Sterling, and Associates could have housed Elena's entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city's financial district, while original oil paintings and Persian rugs broadcasted the firm's success to anyone who entered. Elena sat uncomfortably in a chair that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, watching as Harrison's legal army filed into the room with the confidence of conquering generals. Marcus Blackwood entered last, his silver hair perfectly styled and his custom suit impeccable despite the early morning hour. He carried himself with the bearing of a man who had never lost a case that mattered, never faced an opponent he couldn't intimidate into submission. His cold blue eyes swept dismissively over Elena and David before settling on the stack of documents his associates had prepared. 48 hours to delay the inevitable, Blackwood announced without preamble, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms and courtrooms alike. Mrs. Vasquez, your desperate delay tactics only reinforce our position that you're attempting to obstruct these proceedings through emotional manipulation rather than legal merit. Elena continued taking notes in her precise handwriting, documenting every word with the same methodical attention to detail that had served her well throughout her marriage. David shifted nervously beside her, clearly overwhelmed by the grandeur of their surroundings and the sheer number of expensive attorneys arrayed against them. Harrison sat at the opposite end of the polished mahogany table, flanked by his legal team like a monarch surrounded by advisors. He had aged well during their separation, his stress apparently minimal despite the criminal implications of what Elena had discovered. His confidence remained unshaken, bolstered by the legal fortress he had constructed around himself. The psychological warfare began immediately. Blackwood's team had done their research, crafting personal attacks designed to undermine Elena's credibility and emotional stability. They questioned her education, her work history, and her mental capacity to understand the complex financial instruments that had funded their lavish lifestyle. You worked as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm before your marriage, correct? One of the junior associates asked with barely concealed condescension. No formal training in corporate finance or securities law. No advanced degrees. No experience with the sophisticated financial structures that Mr. Blackthorne's business requires. Elena confirmed the basic facts while internally noting the attorney's obvious strategy. They were establishing a narrative of intellectual inadequacy, painting her as a simple woman who had married above her station and now sought to profit from circumstances she couldn't possibly understand. The personal cruelty escalated as the morning progressed. Blackwood himself took over the questioning, his tone growing increasingly dismissive with each exchange. He referenced Elena's modest background, her family's working-class origins, and what he termed her obvious gold-digging motivations in marrying Harrison. Throughout their marriage, Elena had endured Harrison's psychological manipulation with quiet dignity. He had consistently undermined her intelligence, dismissing her contributions as basic housekeeping while taking credit for financial insights that had actually originated from her careful analysis of their investments and business opportunities. She remembered the evening when she had identified a potential tax advantage that could save their company nearly $2 million annually. Harrison had listened to her explanation, nodded thoughtfully, then presented the exact same strategy to his board of directors the following week as his own innovation. When Elena had quietly mentioned her role in developing the approach, Harrison had laughed it off as basic arithmetic that any housewife could stumble across. The pattern had continued throughout their relationship. Elena's research would inform Harrison's decisions, her insights would guide his investments, and her administrative skills would ensure his business operations ran smoothly. But in public, and increasingly in private, Harrison treated her as decorative rather than functional, arm candy rather than intellectual partner. Now, faced with Harrison's legal team, Elena recognized the same dismissive attitudes amplified and weaponized. Blackwood spoke to her, as if explaining complex concepts to a particularly slow child, his patience clearly performative rather than genuine. The intimidation campaign reached new heights when Harrison's latest romantic interest made her entrance. Sophia Chun was 23 years old, possessed of the kind of effortless beauty that graced magazine covers, and clearly selected to maximize Elena's discomfort. She settled into the chair beside Harrison with the proprietary confidence of someone who had already claimed her place in his life. Sophia's presence served multiple purposes in Harrison's strategy. She demonstrated his desirability and emotional recovery from their marriage, suggesting that Elena's claims of psychological damage were fabricated. More crucially, she represented the future Harrison was building without Elena, a deliberate reminder of everything Elena stood to lose if she continued fighting. David appeared increasingly demoralized as the proceedings continued. He had never faced opposition of this caliber, never dealt with clients who commanded such overwhelming resources. His suggestions became more desperate as the morning progressed, each proposal involving greater concessions, and smaller settlements. Maybe we should consider their offer, he whispered urgently during a brief recess. This level of legal firepower is going to bankrupt you in fees alone, even if we somehow manage to win. Cut your losses and move forward with your life. Elena listened patiently to David's concerns while continuing her meticulous documentation of every exchange. Her notes captured not just the content of each statement, but the precise legal terminology used, the procedural irregularities she observed, and the ethical boundaries that Harrison's team seemed willing to cross in their zeal to destroy her. When proceedings resumed, Blackwood's team unveiled their fabricated evidence of Elena's supposed financial irresponsibility. Bank records showing erratic spending patterns, credit reports reflecting mysterious debt accumulation, and psychological evaluations suggesting emotional instability that had damaged Harrison's business relationships. Elena studied each document carefully, asking seemingly innocent questions about authentication procedures, chain of custody requirements, and the technical standards for admitting financial evidence in divorce proceedings. Her questions demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of legal procedure that surprised even Blackwood, though he attributed it to coaching from David rather than Elena's independent knowledge. During another brief recess, Elena excused herself to make several phone calls. David assumed she was reaching out to family members for emotional support, but Elena's conversations were brief and cryptic, focusing on scheduling conflicts and procedural requirements rather than personal reassurance. The day's final session brought Harrison's ultimatum. Blackwood delivered it with theatrical precision, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority as he outlined Elena's limited options. She could accept their generous settlement offer, acknowledging that she had no legitimate claim to marital assets and agreeing to pay Harrison modest alimony while keeping the matter private. Alternatively, she could face the full force of their legal assault in open court, where they would systematically expose every personal failing, every financial mistake, and every character flaw that made her unworthy of Harrison's initial affection. The choice was hers, but time was running out for rational decision-making. Harrison leaned back in his chair with satisfaction as Blackwood outlined the consequences of continued resistance. Criminal charges for her violation of confidentiality agreements. Civil penalties that would consume any assets she might hope to retain. Personal humiliation that would make rebuilding her life virtually impossible. Elena absorbed every threat with calm attention, her note-taking never wavering despite the escalating intimidation. She asked clarifying questions about court procedures, evidence standards, and the timeline for filing various motions and responses. Her legal curiosity seemed naive to Harrison's team, the desperate grasping of someone trying to understand forces beyond her control. As the meeting concluded, Blackwood delivered Harrison's final message with cold precision. They had been patient with Elena's emotional adjustment to reality, but that patience was exhausted. She had until tomorrow morning to accept their terms or face complete destruction in the legal system they commanded. Elena gathered her documents with the same methodical care she had displayed throughout the day. Her movements remained calm and purposeful despite the overwhelming pressure Harrison's team had applied. She thanked Blackwood politely for his time and expressed hope that they could resolve matters amicably in everyone's best interests. Walking out of the imposing law firm, Elena felt the weight of their threats, but also the clarity that came with complete understanding of her opponent's strategy. Harrison had revealed his entire hand, confident that overwhelming force would compel her immediate surrender. But Elena's 48 hours of preparation had involved more than emotional adjustment. Tomorrow's court appearance would require careful scheduling coordination, and there was one particular conflict she needed to resolve before facing Harrison's legal army in open court. The phone calls she had been making weren't requests for emotional support. They were professional consultations about jurisdictional procedures, ethical requirements, and the proper protocols for handling conflicts of interest in legal proceedings. Harrison's confidence in his legal strategy was about to encounter a reality he had never considered. His dismissive attitude toward Elena's intelligence was about to prove catastrophic to everything he had built. The county courthouse stood like a fortress of justice against the gray morning sky, its limestone columns and imposing architecture designed to inspire respect for the legal system housed within its walls. Elena arrived 30 minutes early, parking her modest sedan between luxury vehicles that belonged to Harrison's legal entourage. She wore a simple navy suit that David had suggested would project appropriate humility before the court, though Elena had chosen it for entirely different reasons. David met her at the courthouse steps, his nervousness evident in the way he fumbled with his briefcase and repeatedly checked his watch. He had spent the previous evening preparing for what he clearly expected to be a legal massacre, his modest experience no match for the corporate litigation specialists they were about to face. The courtroom itself buzzed with anticipation as word had spread through the legal community about the unprecedented array of talent Harrison had assembled. Court reporters positioned themselves strategically to capture what many expected would become a textbook example of overwhelming legal force applied to a routine domestic matter. Harrison's team arrived like a conquering army, their confident stride and expensive suits announcing their dominance before a single word was spoken. Marcus Blackwood led the procession, followed by 9 associates whose combined legal firepower could have defended a multinational corporation against federal prosecution. They filled half the courtroom's seating area, their presence alone intimidating anyone who might have considered supporting Elena's position. Elena took her assigned seat beside David, appearing small and vulnerable in comparison to the legal fortress arrayed against her. Courthouse staff whispered among themselves about the unusual nature of the proceeding, wondering what could justify such massive legal representation for a simple divorce case. Judge Patricia Morrison entered precisely at 9 o'clock, her black robes and authoritative bearing commanding immediate silence from the packed courtroom. She surveyed the unusual scene before her with obvious curiosity, her experienced eyes taking in the disproportionate representation on Harrison's side of the aisle. Blackwood rose to deliver his opening statements with theatrical precision, his voice projecting the confidence of someone who had never faced meaningful opposition in proceedings of this nature. He painted Elena as a gold-digging opportunist who had discovered financial irregularities through illegal invasion of privacy and now sought to profit from her unauthorized access to confidential business information. The embezzlement allegations were dismissed as the desperate fabrications of a woman facing the reality of returning to her modest origins after years of enjoying unearned luxury. Elena's discovery of offshore accounts was reframed as industrial espionage that violated numerous confidentiality agreements and business partnerships that Harrison's company maintained with international clients. David began to rise for his response, clearly intending to offer a weak objection to Blackwood's characterization of the evidence. However, he stumbled over the proper legal terminology, preparing to cite an irrelevant precedent that would have strengthened Harrison's position rather than Elena's. Elena leaned forward slightly and whispered a correction that stopped David mid-sentence. Her suggestion referenced Federal Rule of Evidence 401 and its specific application to financial documentation in marital dissolution proceedings. The precision of her legal terminology caught David off guard, but he incorporated her guidance seamlessly into his objection. Blackwood paused momentarily, surprised by the sudden competence of Elena's representation, but quickly dismissed it as lucky preparation rather than genuine legal sophistication. He continued his presentation with renewed vigor, confident that occasional technical accuracy couldn't overcome the fundamental weakness of Elena's position. As the morning progressed, Elena continued providing quiet guidance to David, her corrections becoming increasingly sophisticated and specific. She referenced California Family Code sections with remarkable precision, suggested procedural objections based on complex evidentiary standards, and identified technical flaws in Harrison's financial disclosure requirements. Several members of Harrison's legal team began exchanging glances as Elena's contributions became impossible to ignore. Her understanding of discovery procedures, asset valuation methodologies, and forensic accounting standards exceeded what any layperson should possess, regardless of their preparation efforts. When Blackwood presented fabricated evidence of Elena's psychological instability, Elena quietly directed David's attention to specific authentication requirements under California Evidence Code Section 1400. Her knowledge of expert witness qualification standards and the technical requirements for admitting medical evidence demonstrated a legal sophistication that went far beyond casual research. Judge Morrison observed these exchanges with growing interest, particularly noting Elena's precise use of legal terminology and her obvious familiarity with complex procedural requirements. The woman's quiet confidence and technical expertise seemed oddly inconsistent with the helpless victim narrative that Harrison's team was promoting. During a brief recess, Elena requested permission to address the court directly regarding several procedural irregularities she had observed in the opposition's presentation. David looked confused by his client's sudden assertiveness, but Judge Morrison granted the unusual request with obvious curiosity about Elena's concerns. Elena stood with a composure that transformed her entire presence in the courtroom. Her voice carried a quiet authority as she identified specific violations of discovery requirements that Harrison's team had committed in their evidence presentation. She cited relevant case law with remarkable precision, referencing appeals court decisions and procedural standards that most practicing attorneys would need to research carefully. The bailiff, a veteran court officer named Robert Shun who had worked in the county system for over 2 decades, found himself staring at Elena with growing recognition. Something about her bearing, her legal knowledge, and her commanding presence in addressing the court triggered a memory that he struggled to place. Blackwood interrupted Elena's presentation with obvious irritation, objecting to her direct address of the court as procedurally inappropriate for a represented party. However, Elena calmly cited the relevant authority for her right to address the court regarding procedural violations, referencing Code of Civil Procedure Section 367 with the confidence of someone who had applied it numerous times in practice. Harrison's confidence began to waver as he watched his ex-wife demonstrate legal knowledge that he had never suspected during their marriage. The woman he had dismissed as intellectually inferior was systematically identifying flaws in his expensive legal strategy using technical expertise that rivaled his own attorneys. Elena's questions about evidence admissibility revealed intimate familiarity with forensic accounting standards, international banking regulations, and the specific procedures for tracing offshore financial transactions. Her knowledge extended beyond general legal principles to specialized areas of commercial litigation that few attorneys outside major corporate firms would understand thoroughly. When Blackwood attempted to present Harrison's psychological evaluation of Elena as evidence of her emotional instability, Elena immediately objected based on the expert's failure to comply with court-ordered evaluation procedures. She cited specific requirements under Evidence Code Section 721 and identified procedural violations that could invalidate the entire assessment. Judge Morrison sustained Elena's objection with obvious surprise at the technical accuracy of her legal reasoning. The ruling forced Blackwood to withdraw a significant portion of his evidence, creating gaps in his presentation that he had not anticipated needing to address. Elena continued taking meticulous notes throughout the proceedings, but her documentation now included specific citations of procedural violations, ethical concerns, and technical errors in the opposition's approach. Her legal analysis was becoming impossible to dismiss as amateur preparation or lucky guesswork. The courtroom atmosphere grew increasingly tense as Harrison's legal team realized they were facing opposition that they had not prepared to encounter. Elena's transformation from vulnerable victim to sophisticated legal adversary was happening before their eyes, and they had no strategy for dealing with this unexpected development. Bailiff Chin finally placed his nagging recognition as Elena addressed a complex question of jurisdictional authority with the precise legal reasoning of someone who had ruled on similar issues many times before. His eyes widened with sudden understanding, and he immediately whispered something urgent to the court clerk. Elena concluded her direct address by requesting a brief recess for what she termed proper introductions and clarification of certain conflicts of interest that had recently come to her attention. Her request was framed in technical language that suggested knowledge of judicial procedures far beyond what any litigant should possess. Judge Morrison granted the recess with obvious fascination about what Elena might reveal during the break. Harrison's legal team huddled in confused consultation, trying to understand how their supposedly helpless opponent had demonstrated such sophisticated legal expertise. Elena gathered her documents with the same methodical precision she had displayed throughout the proceedings, but now her movements carried the authority of someone completely comfortable in the legal environment that was supposed to intimidate her into submission. When court reconvened after the 15-minute recess, Elena rose from her seat with a transformation that left the entire courtroom transfixed. Gone was the hesitant demeanor of a nervous divorce petitioner. In its place stood a woman who commanded the legal space around her with the quiet confidence of someone intimately familiar with courtroom procedures and judicial authority. Elena addressed Judge Morrison directly, her voice carrying the clear diction and measured cadence of someone accustomed to speaking before legal tribunals. She began by systematically addressing the procedural violations she had observed in the opposition's presentation, citing specific rules and precedents with a precision that made seasoned attorneys reach for their reference materials. Your Honor, the petitioner's counsel has failed to comply with mandatory disclosure requirements under Family Code Section 2100, Elena stated with calm authority. Their financial documentation lacks proper authentication under Evidence Code Section 1400, and several exhibits appear to violate the best evidence rule as established in People v. Skinner. Blackwood rose to object, but Elena continued with unshakable composure, preempting his concerns with technical legal reasoning that demonstrated mastery of complex procedural requirements. She identified specific deficiencies in Harrison's asset valuation methodology, questioned the admissibility of expert testimony that failed to meet Daubert standards, and highlighted discovery violations that could result in sanctions against opposing counsel. Harrison watched in growing horror as his ex-wife systematically dismantled the legal strategy that had cost him millions to develop. The woman he had consistently dismissed as intellectually inferior was demonstrating knowledge of commercial litigation, forensic accounting, and evidence law that surpassed many of his expensive attorneys. Elena produced her own evidence with meticulous attention to proper foundation and authentication procedures. Her documentation of Harrison's embezzlement scheme included detailed forensic analysis of international wire transfers, cryptocurrency transaction logs, and corporate accounting irregularities that revealed the full scope of his criminal activity. Each piece of evidence was introduced with perfect adherence to procedural requirements, demonstrating Elena's intimate familiarity with the technical standards that governed complex financial litigation. Her presentation included proper chain of custody documentation, expert witness qualifications that exceeded court requirements, and legal analysis that referenced current case law with remarkable sophistication. Blackwood attempted to challenge Elena's evidence presentation, citing procedural objections that he hoped would disrupt her methodical approach. However, Elena responded to each objection with precise legal reasoning that not only defeated his challenges, but exposed fundamental flaws in his understanding of current evidence law. When Blackwood incorrectly cited Brady v. Maryland in an attempt to challenge Elena's disclosure timing, Elena calmly corrected him by noting that Brady applied to criminal prosecutions rather than civil proceedings, and that the appropriate standard for her disclosure was established in Stewart v. Blackwell. Her correction was delivered with the patient tone of someone explaining basic legal principles to a first-year law student. The court clerk, Maria Santos, had been following Elena's legal reasoning with growing amazement and sudden recognition. During a brief sidebar conference, she whispered urgently to Bailiff Chun, confirming the suspicion that had been building throughout Elena's presentation. Elena continued her systematic destruction of Harrison's case by addressing the fabricated evidence of her supposed psychological instability. She demonstrated that the psychological evaluation violated multiple professional standards, that the examining psychiatrist lacked proper credentials for forensic assessment, and that the evaluation methodology failed to meet accepted standards for admissibility in family court proceedings. Furthermore, Elena presented her own psychiatric evaluation conducted by a board-certified forensic psychiatrist whose credentials and methodology exceeded anything Harrison's team had provided. The evaluation thoroughly debunked claims of emotional instability while documenting the psychological abuse she had endured throughout their marriage. Harrison's legal team scrambled to respond to Elena's presentation, but their objections revealed unfamiliarity with the specialized areas of law that Elena was citing with obvious expertise. Their confident demeanor crumbled as Elena demonstrated superior knowledge of the very legal specialties they claimed to master. David Restrepo sat in stunned silence as he realized that his supposedly helpless client was delivering a legal presentation that exceeded his own capabilities as a practicing attorney. Elena's knowledge of procedural requirements, evidence law, and forensic accounting suggested professional training and experience that went far beyond what she had revealed during their initial consultation. Elena addressed the court's concerns about Harrison's alleged business losses by presenting detailed financial analysis that exposed the fabricated nature of his damage claims. Her forensic accounting revealed that Harrison's business had actually thrived during their separation, with profits increasing substantially once his embezzlement activities were curtailed by her discovery of his criminal behavior. The technical sophistication of Elena's financial analysis stunned Harrison's team of expensive corporate attorneys. Her understanding of complex accounting principles, international banking regulations, and securities law exceeded what most general practice lawyers would possess after decades of experience. When Blackwood attempted to challenge Elena's accounting methodology, she responded with citations to generally accepted accounting principles, Securities and Exchange Commission regulations, and Federal Reserve banking standards that demonstrated professional-level expertise in financial investigation and analysis. Harrison's confidence completely evaporated as Elena systematically exposed every lie, every fabrication, and every criminal act that had defined their marriage. Her presentation included recorded conversations where Harrison had explicitly acknowledged his embezzlement activities, documented evidence of his systematic deception of investors, and forensic proof of his attempts to hide criminal proceeds in offshore accounts. Elena's voice remained calm and authoritative throughout her devastating presentation, never rising in anger or emotion despite the personal betrayal and professional criminality she was documenting. Her demeanor projected the controlled competence of someone who had presided over similar proceedings many times before. Judge Morrison observed Elena's presentation with obvious fascination and growing recognition of the extraordinary legal competence being displayed before her court. The technical precision of Elena's arguments, the sophistication of her evidence presentation, and the authoritative manner in which she addressed complex legal issues suggested professional experience that went far beyond what any civilian litigant should possess. Bailiff Chun had been growing increasingly certain of Elena's identity throughout her presentation. The woman's bearing, her legal expertise, and her commanding presence in addressing the court all confirmed his suspicion about who was actually standing before them in apparent disguise as a helpless divorce petitioner. Elena concluded her presentation by requesting that the court consider sanctions against opposing counsel for their presentation of fabricated evidence, their violations of discovery requirements, and their apparent lack of due diligence in verifying the accuracy of their clients' representations to the court. Her request was framed in technical language that demonstrated intimate familiarity with the disciplinary procedures that governed attorney conduct, the ethical requirements that bounded zealous advocacy, and the sanctions authority that courts possessed to address misconduct by officers of the court. Harrison's legal team sat in stunned silence as they realized that their overwhelming advantage in resources and reputation had been systematically neutralized by superior legal knowledge and meticulous preparation. The woman they had dismissed as an easy victim had proven to be the most formidable opponent any of them had ever encountered. Elena's transformation from vulnerable petitioner to commanding legal authority was now complete, but the most shocking revelation was yet to come. During the brief recess that followed Elena's devastating legal presentation, Bailiff Robert Chun approached her with the deep respect and formal bearing that he reserved for the highest-ranking judicial officers in the county system. His voice carried unmistakable reverence as he addressed her with the title that everyone in the courtroom was about to discover. "Your Honor," Bailiff Chun said clearly, his words cutting through the confused murmur of the assembled attorneys like a thunderclap. "Judge Vasquez, I apologize for not recognizing you immediately. Should I inform Judge Morrison of the jurisdictional considerations that may affect these proceedings?" The courtroom fell into absolute silence as the implications of Chen's words registered with stunning clarity. Harrison's entire legal team froze in their seats, their confident expressions transforming into masks of horror as they realized the magnitude of their miscalculation. Elena straightened to her full height, her transformation now complete as she acknowledged Chin's recognition with the quiet dignity befitting her actual position in the legal hierarchy. "Thank you, Bailiff Chen. Yes, please inform Judge Morrison that Judge Elena Maria Vasquez of the Superior Court of California, San Bernardino County, is present and that proper protocols should be observed regarding potential conflicts of interest." Court Clerk Maria Santos immediately began verifying Elena's credentials through the state judicial database, though her recognition had been growing throughout Elena's legal presentation. Within moments, she confirmed what Chun had announced. Elena was indeed the Honorable Judge Elena Vasquez, the youngest person ever appointed to the Superior Court bench in California history. Marcus Blackwood's face drained of all color as the reality of his situation crashed down upon him with devastating force. For 2 days, he had condescended to, insulted, and attempted to intimidate a sitting Superior Court judge whose legal authority exceeded his own by orders of magnitude. Every dismissive comment, every personal attack, and every attempt at legal bullying had been directed at someone who possessed the power to end his career with a single ethics complaint. Elena had taken an official leave of absence from her judicial duties during the divorce proceedings to avoid any appearance of impropriety or conflict of interest. Her temporary separation from the bench had been a matter of public record, filed with the appropriate judicial oversight committees and documented according to established protocols for judges facing personal legal matters. The backstory of Elena's extraordinary qualifications began emerging as court staff whispered among themselves about the legendary figure now revealed in their midst. Elena had graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law School at age 24, having completed her undergraduate degree at Stanford in just 3 years while maintaining a perfect academic record. Her legal career had been meteoric in its ascent through the most prestigious ranks of the profession. After clerking for a Supreme Court justice, Elena had joined the United States Attorney's Office for the Central District of California, where she prosecuted complex white-collar crimes and international financial fraud cases with unprecedented success rates. Elena's expertise in forensic accounting, international banking law, and criminal financial investigations had made her the government's premier prosecutor for sophisticated embezzlement and securities fraud cases. She had successfully convicted corrupt corporate executives, dismantled international money laundering operations, and recovered hundreds of millions in stolen assets for defrauded investors. Her appointment to the Superior Court bench at age 32 had been unanimously confirmed by the State Judicial Commission, despite her youth, because her legal brilliance and ethical integrity were beyond question. Elena's reputation for fairness, technical expertise, and uncompromising adherence to legal principles had made her one of the most respected judges in the state system. Harrison sat in stunned disbelief as the true scope of Elena's deception became clear. The woman he had married, dismissed as intellectually inferior and psychologically abused for 8 years, was not only a sitting judge, but one of the most accomplished legal minds in California. Every condescending comment about her intelligence, every dismissal of her capabilities, and every attempt to control her had been directed at someone whose professional achievements dwarfed his own. Elena's decision to conceal her judicial appointment from Harrison had been motivated by her desire to preserve their marriage despite his obvious insecurities about her success. She had hoped that downplaying her professional accomplishments would allow Harrison to feel more secure in their relationship, though his psychological abuse had continued regardless of her attempted accommodation. The fabricated evidence that Harrison's team had presented about Elena's supposed financial irresponsibility now appeared not merely false, but criminally fraudulent when directed at a sitting judge whose financial integrity was regularly scrutinized by judicial oversight committees. Elena's annual financial disclosures to the state had documented her meticulous management of personal finances and complete transparency about all income sources and investment activities. Blackwood's junior associates began frantically reviewing their case files, searching for any statement or action that might be construed as ethical violations in their treatment of a judicial officer. Their realization that they had essentially been attacking a sitting judge in open court sent waves of panic through the expensive legal team. Elena addressed Judge Morrison with the professional courtesy that one judicial officer extends to another, explaining that she had maintained strict adherence to conflict of interest protocols throughout the proceedings by taking approved leave and ensuring that no judicial authority had been exercised or implied during her divorce case. Judge Morrison responded with obvious respect for Elena's reputation and careful attention to the proper protocols for handling proceedings involving a fellow judicial officer. The complexity of ensuring appropriate procedural protections while maintaining the integrity of the legal process required careful consideration of established precedents for such unusual circumstances. Elena's revelation included disclosure of her extensive documentation of ethical violations committed by Harrison's legal team during their attempts to intimidate and deceive her. Her meticulous records included recordings of inappropriate ex parte communications, evidence of fabricated documentation, and proof of discovery violations that could result in disciplinary action by the State Bar. Furthermore, Elena revealed that her modest lawyer, David Restrepo, was actually an undercover investigator for the State Bar's Ethics Enforcement Division, working in cooperation with Elena to document the systematic misconduct that characterized Harrison's legal strategy. Their entire proceeding had been an elaborate ethics investigation disguised as a routine divorce case. Harrison's realization that his own criminal activities had been under investigation by a superior court judge throughout their marriage hit him with devastating force. Elena's discovery of his embezzlement had not been the accident he had assumed, but rather the result of sophisticated financial investigation techniques that she had developed during her career prosecuting identical crimes. Elena had been carefully documenting Harrison's criminal activity from the moment she discovered it, building an airtight case that would ensure his prosecution and conviction while protecting herself from any appearance of complicity in his schemes. Her 8 years of marriage to Harrison had essentially been 8 years of deep undercover investigation into his financial crimes. The offshore accounts that Harrison had used to hide his stolen funds were already under surveillance by federal authorities working in cooperation with Elena's investigation. Every transfer, every transaction, and every attempt to conceal criminal proceeds had been monitored and documented with the precision that Elena brought to all her legal work. Blackwood's team faced the horrifying realization that their aggressive legal tactics had been employed against a sitting judge who possessed not only the authority to end their careers, but also detailed documentation of every ethical violation they had committed in pursuit of their clients' interests. Elena's true identity transformed every aspect of the proceeding from a David versus Goliath divorce battle into a carefully orchestrated ethics investigation that had successfully documented systematic misconduct by some of the state's most prominent attorneys. The revelation of Elena's true identity as Judge Elena Vasquez triggered a cascade of consequences that transformed the courthouse proceedings into a scene of unprecedented legal drama. Judge Morrison immediately recused herself from further proceedings involving a fellow judicial officer, but not before ensuring that all necessary protocols were followed to preserve the integrity of Elena's carefully documented evidence. Elena formally addressed the court in her capacity as a superior court judge temporarily appearing as a litigant, explaining that her meticulous adherence to conflict of interest procedures had been designed to ensure that justice could be served without any appearance of judicial impropriety. Her documentation of Harrison's criminal activities and his legal team's ethical violations had been conducted entirely within the bounds of appropriate legal investigation. Marcus Blackwood sat in horrified silence as the full magnitude of his professional catastrophe became clear. For 2 days, he had insulted, condescended to, and attempted to intimidate a sitting superior court judge whose legal authority and professional reputation exceeded his own. Every dismissive comment about Elena's intelligence, every personal attack on her character, and every attempt at legal bullying had been permanently recorded in official court proceedings. Elena's transformation from apparent victim to commanding judicial authority was now complete, and she wielded that authority with the precise professionalism that had made her legendary in California's legal community. She formally requested that all proceedings be suspended pending the arrival of federal prosecutors who had been coordinating with her investigation of Harrison's embezzlement activities. The systematic destruction of Harrison's fabricated evidence proceeded with methodical precision as Elena demonstrated how forensic financial analysis had revealed the true scope of his criminal enterprise. Her expertise in prosecuting sophisticated white-collar crimes had enabled her to trace every stolen dollar through complex offshore banking networks that Harrison had believed were impenetrable. Elena's documentation revealed that Harrison's embezzlement had extended far beyond the $23 million she had initially discovered. His systematic theft from investor accounts totaled over $87 million, hidden across multiple jurisdictions using cryptocurrency exchanges and shell corporations that he had established with remarkable sophistication. The arrival of federal agents from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network marked the beginning of Harrison's final downfall. Elena had been cooperating with their investigation for months, providing technical expertise and forensic analysis that had enabled them to build an airtight case against Harrison's criminal organization. Agent Sarah Martinez, the lead federal prosecutor, addressed the court with deep respect for Elena's contributions to their investigation. Judge Vasquez has provided invaluable assistance in documenting the most sophisticated embezzlement scheme our unit has encountered, Agent Martinez announced. Her expertise in financial forensics and her access to the defendant's personal activities enabled us to trace criminal proceeds that would otherwise have remained hidden permanently. Harrison watched in growing horror as handcuffs appeared and federal agents began the process of taking him into custody. His confidence in his legal protection evaporated as Elena methodically outlined how every aspect of his criminal activity had been documented with prosecutorial precision throughout their marriage. The psychological manipulation that Harrison had employed against Elena throughout their relationship now revealed its true purpose. His consistent dismissal of her intelligence and professional capabilities had been designed to maintain control over someone whose legal expertise far exceeded his own understanding of the criminal consequences of his actions. Elena's decision to endure 8 years of psychological abuse while secretly documenting Harrison's crimes demonstrated the kind of professional dedication that had made her one of the youngest judges ever appointed in California. Her sacrifice of personal happiness in service of justice exemplified the ethical principles that governed her judicial career. Blackwood's legal team faced immediate disciplinary action as Elena provided detailed documentation of their ethical violations to state bar investigators who had been monitoring the proceedings in coordination with her ethics investigation. The fabrication of evidence, the violations of discovery requirements, and the systematic attempts to intimidate a judicial officer constituted career-ending misconduct for attorneys at their level. Junior Associate Patricia Williams broke down in tears as she realized that her participation in Harrison's deception would result in disbarment before her legal career had truly begun. Senior partner Daniel Sterling faced the loss of his partnership and potential criminal charges for his role in presenting fabricated evidence to the court. Elena addressed each attorney individually, documenting specific instances of misconduct with the precise legal analysis that characterized all her judicial work. Her evidence included recordings of inappropriate communications, proof of discovery violations, and documentation of their attempts to suborn perjury in pursuit of their clients' fraudulent objectives. The systematic dismantling of Harrison's legal defense revealed the comprehensive nature of Elena's investigation into his criminal activities. Every offshore account had been identified, every cryptocurrency transaction had been traced, and every attempt to conceal stolen assets had been documented with forensic precision that would ensure successful prosecution. Harrison's young girlfriend, Sophia Chun, fled the courthouse as federal agents began seizing assets that had been purchased with embezzled funds. The luxury lifestyle that Harrison had used to impress her had been built entirely on stolen money, making her association with him a potential source of criminal liability. Elena's revelation that she had been conducting a judicial-level investigation throughout their marriage transformed Harrison's perception of every conversation, every financial discussion, and every business decision they had shared. His wife had not been the naive victim he had assumed, but rather a superior court judge systematically documenting his criminal enterprise. The forfeiture proceedings that followed Harrison's arrest targeted every asset that could be traced to his embezzlement activities. The mansion in the hills, the luxury vehicles, the private jet, and the expensive art collection all represented proceeds from criminal activity that would be seized and liquidated to compensate his victims. Elena's professional reputation emerged from the proceedings enhanced rather than damaged, as legal professionals throughout the state recognized the extraordinary dedication she had demonstrated in pursuing justice despite personal cost. Her willingness to endure years of psychological abuse while building a criminal case against her own husband exemplified the highest standards of judicial integrity. 6 months after Harrison's federal indictment, Elena returned to her judicial chambers with a renewed appreciation for the importance of justice and accountability in American legal institutions. Harrison had been sentenced to 35 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to charges that included embezzlement, money laundering, securities fraud, and conspiracy to defraud investors. Marcus Blackwood faced disbarment proceedings that would end his career in disgrace, while his junior associates scattered to find new employment in legal environments that would accept attorneys who had attempted to intimidate a sitting judge. The prestigious law firm of Blackwood, Sterling, and Associates dissolved within months as clients fled the scandal. Elena's return to the bench was marked by a ceremony recognizing her extraordinary service to the cause of justice and her personal sacrifice in pursuing criminal accountability despite significant personal cost. Governor Patricia Williams presented Elena with a special commendation for her dedication to law enforcement and her exemplary conduct throughout the investigation. What strikes me most about this story is how power and perception can completely shift when the full truth emerges. Have you ever experienced a moment where someone underestimated your capabilities, only to be shocked when they discovered what you were really capable of? I'd love to hear about your own experiences with proving people wrong in the comments below. The final court session in Elena's complex case brought together federal prosecutors, state bar investigators, and judicial oversight officials to ensure that all aspects of the matter were resolved with appropriate attention to legal procedure and ethical requirements. Elena's meticulous documentation had enabled swift resolution of what could have been years of complicated legal proceedings. Elena's chambers overlooked the same courthouse steps where she had once arrived as an apparently vulnerable divorce petitioner facing overwhelming legal opposition. Now, as she prepared to hear cases from her judicial bench, Elena reflected on the importance of never underestimating people based on appearances or assumptions about their capabilities. The local legal newspaper featured Elena's case as a landmark example of judicial integrity and professional dedication, noting that her willingness to sacrifice personal comfort in pursuit of justice had resulted in the conviction of one of the state's most sophisticated white-collar criminals and the exposure of systematic ethical violations by prominent attorneys. Harrison's former business empire collapsed entirely as federal investigators revealed the extent of his criminal activities to investors who had trusted him with their financial futures. The cryptocurrency exchange that had been his legitimate business front was liquidated to provide partial restitution to victims of his embezzlement scheme. Elena's story became a cautionary tale in legal circles about the dangers of underestimating opponents and the importance of maintaining ethical standards even when representing wealthy and powerful clients. Law schools began using her case as an example of how judicial integrity and professional dedication could triumph over unlimited resources and corrupt legal tactics. Judge Elena Vasquez continued her distinguished judicial career with an enhanced reputation for fairness, technical expertise, and uncompromising dedication to justice that made her one of the most respected members of California's legal community. Her chambers became a symbol of how the legal system could function properly when guided by principles rather than power.